Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how I carve my my foam pumpkins. This is kind of an advanced thing. I've had a lot of people ask me, wow, how do you do that? I'll show you some of the pumpkins that we have that I've done. So this is kind of a tutorial, kind of more showing you what I do in making these, in carving these foam pumpkins. So I'm using patterns, very advanced patterns, downloaded off of Stonykins. So that's patterns for one of the pumpkins that I'll show you, or that you'll see in the group of pumpkins that I've carved. So I'm just pretty much going to go through my process in carving the pumpkin. We'll go over tools, putting the pattern on, cutting the pattern out. This is a shaded pattern, so it has both cut through pieces and then also has shaded pieces, which are cut about halfway through the pumpkin, so the light on the inside causes an orange glow instead of more of a yellow shine through, and that gives a 3D effect. The pattern that I'm going to do today is, like I said, one of the more advanced patterns, and this is the pattern here, which is a lighthouse. I've already carved this, but I was carving another one for my church. My church is Lighthouse Church, so I figured I'd carve my pumpkin with a lighthouse on it, because I wanted to keep mine, the one I've already carved. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through different things, how I carve. I'll start with just showing you, you know, basic cutout carves, and then what I'll do is I'll move on to, hopefully we'll do this time lapse to where you can just see me working through all the things. So it depends on the pattern that you're doing. Patterns have taken me anywhere from a couple hours to 10 hours, depending on how intricate I want to get, how clean I want it to look, or just how hard the pattern is. I've done, you know, most of the ones that I do are very hard patterns, very elaborate patterns. I've been doing this for a long time, so I just like the challenge. The easy ones are fine for doing on real pumpkins. I started out doing these on real pumpkins, but I quickly moved on to, you know, I'd spend hours carving a 3D what was it, Frankenstein with lightning in the background. Looked great. Carved it on a real pumpkin. It was beautiful for 1 year, or for one Halloween. You know, the pumpkin rotted, quickly went away. So I started doing these in the foam pumpkin instead of using the little saws that you get with the pumpkin tools. Moved on to using Dremel bits and going from there. So I will, like I said, I'll walk through tools, carving, cleanup, lighting, pretty much everything I do to make one of these pumpkins. So there you are. So carving foam pumpkins, these are pretty much the tools that I use. So I have a Dremel tool with a extendable handle that lets me get down to fine detail without having the bulk of the machine in the way. Scissors just to cut the pattern. But really what I mostly use are diamond bits. and drill bits. So I bought a diamond bit set like that from Harbor Freight for a few bucks. I have a lot of other bits up here, and I'll cover a couple of those here in a second. But these are really small drill bits that you can get in a package. Harbor Freight, once again, couple bucks, not a big investment. But these are pretty small drill bits. Now they come in different sizes, from really tiny. But the problem with the little ones is, see where it's cut out for the drill bit section? It's really small. So if you take, here's a piece of the foam pumpkin that I cut out earlier. If you take and put that next to that one there, you'll see that the threads on that drill bit barely make it through that. But we're going to be cutting not straight in, but in a side-to-side manner. So when you put your drill bit in, you'll stick it in, and then you'll move it like this, and it'll cut that groove out. So you want to have a drill bit small enough to do detail, but large enough to make it through the pumpkin. So when you're carving, you'll put your drill bit in, and then you'll want to keep it about that depth, and then just go around your pattern. The other set of bits that I have, the diamond bits, I use two primarily. I use a pointed one here. Let me see if I can get that shadow out of the way. I use a pointed one here for real fine details. It is tapered, so but it has the finest point. And then I use just a straight round one here to do more of the larger areas. And you can see by the shading of orange on these bits, I've used different bits for different situations. So with the large area that I'm going to be doing this pumpkin on, I will pull out one of these larger bits here to do the massive area of shading after I do an outline with one of these smaller bits. It just takes off a lot more pumpkin. Now, once you have your pumpkin carved, your big shaded areas, they're going to be rough because these are pretty small bits. And unless you have a lot steadier hand than I do, it's not going to be smooth. So what I like to do is, I have a couple brushes that I got here. This is a paint stripper brush. This is a wire brush. I use these two to smooth out the large areas of the pumpkin that were shaded, and that's not cut all the way through. So I like the wire brush for this instance, and that's what I'm going to be using mostly, because it gives kind of a wispy look to the cloud. So we'll go from there, and I don't know, I'll probably only smooth out the large area and leave the other ones, just because I'm not really that particular. You know, some of you may want to go in and do the smaller areas, smooth those up a bit. The other couple things that you have is an X-Acto knife. I have some dental tools here. This one kind of has a flat blade on the side. This one's pointed. I use the pointed one to pull out the cut pieces out if I can't get a hold of them. I use the flat bit here to help me scrape off some of the pattern after I'm done. Because the patterns are printed out on labels, and I'll show you those here in a second. So really, this is the tools that you need. Your big investment's going to be your Dremel tool and your extension arm there. But, you know, you can probably get the drill bit set, the diamond bit set for probably under 10 bucks at Harbor Freight. You can probably find them cheaper online. And to tell you the truth, you really don't need more than this. You can buy different things to make it easier down the road, but these two are really what you need to get started with. Sorry, I bought a new light that seems to have a dimmer on it if the people aren't moving around. Okay, so the pumpkin I use is a Funkin. These I get from Joann's or Hobby Lobby. There are other types like this one over here. Let me grab that real quick. It's a different type of foam, different type of pumpkin. I like the Funkins better for carving because the foam on the inside is a little bit stiffer. So when you cut through it or when you shade, it tends to peel off or peel away instead of hanging on. So, for instance, if you cut a piece of foam, you know, you kind of, or rip a piece of foam, you kind of have the edges that hang on. So with the Funkins, they're a little bit easier to carve. However, the outside finish tends to peel off when you take your sticker off. That's one of the issues. Now, for the patterns, I'll show you this right here. This is the inside of the label for the Funkin. You'll see right there, Stoney's pattern right in the middle, Stoneykins.com. Well, that's where I get all my patterns. Pretty cheap. He has some awesome patterns. I'll show you some examples later. This is the pattern that we're going to do today. We're going to be working on a lighthouse. Now, I took this pattern from the website, I loaded it up into Photoshop, and I made it 10 inches tall. Our pumpkin has just about a 10-inch carving area, so from here down to here. It made it wider because this is in landscape mode. So I had to print it out on 2 labels. So these are just like Avery labels, shipping labels, full sheet labels. So I print these out. What I'll end up doing is just cutting this one and then overlapping these 2 a bit, making it one cohesive piece, and then I'll be sticking that onto the pumpkin. So here's another example of one of Stoney's patterns. You'll see this one out of the examples I carved. So yeah, that's really the pattern. Printed on labels, stuck directly onto the pumpkin. Now, if you go to the website, you look through a lot of the stuff, they recommend on the black shaded areas, you outline them with an X-Acto knife. That's going to make for clean cuts, that's going to make for clean edges. Ain't nobody got time for that. So, I don't usually do that, especially on something like this where you don't really need clean edges, right? So, everything is going to be mainly landscape. You know, if you cut a little bit off here more than you should, who's gonna know? So on something like this, I don't really need hard edges. It doesn't really matter. So I just forego that piece. I don't really care. The drill bits are going to make a smooth enough edge, especially in the Funkins type brand pumpkin, that it doesn't really matter. One of the problems that we have is we have a 2D shape printed out on a label, and we have a 3D pumpkin. So this causes problems, right? So no matter what you do, when you put this pattern on, it's going to wrinkle. So let me give you an example here. So you put that on, and the main carving area here is fairly flat, but when you try to wrap that around, I can't do that with one hand. Anyway, when you try to wrap that around, you're going to need to crinkle the edges, crease the edges in order for that to fit around the pumpkin. Now, what I found and what I use is just a spray bottle here. This spray bottle just has plain water in it, and I have it set to where it very finely mists. So no big water droplets, just a really fine mist. And after I get my pattern, when I get my pattern ready and ready to put on the pumpkin, I will mist the pattern with water. that allows me to crease and fold this in a better way that allows me to conform that pumpkin or conform that pattern around that pumpkin. So that's just a kind of an insider trick. I don't even know if they cover that on the website, but it just helps a lot. Now, you don't want to get it too wet because the back of this is adhesive. You don't want to get that too wet. So just finely mist this. It will make this hard paper be soft, and then you can conform that around the pumpkin. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. What I'm actually going to do is I think I'm going to coat the outside of this pumpkin with like a matte spray, a matte finish, because I've had some issues with this paint peeling a little bit when I just pull off the stickers. So I'll do that, and then when I get ready to put the pattern on, we'll come back. Okay, so we have a couple issues when we put a pattern on a pumpkin, as I said before. So let me get this, tilt that down a little bit more. So the issue that we have with a flat pattern going over a round pumpkin, see how we have big, really big folds in it when you come around and try to form it to that pumpkin. So as I said, I take it and I'll spritz it with water and use kind of what I do, or what I've been doing. I don't know if this is the best way or not, but I'll take the backing off the labels in the center of the pattern. I can pull these other ones off later, but I want to get that center line there. And this is a rather large pumpkin, so I'm looking for the bottom seam here so it goes from side to side. And I think I'm going to put that lighthouse right there. That way the pattern is within the seam limits. It's not over too far. But the lighthouse specifically is right on the center line. Let me pull that off again. So here's where the water bottle comes into play. So I'm going to take this pattern and I'm just gonna mist it with water. Not enough to soak it. Actually, I probably got too much water on there. Let me wipe a little bit of it off. But just enough to get the pattern a little wet, and not enough to really soak through to the sticky part on the back. So let's position this again. There's my side line. There's my center line. So I'm going to position this on the pumpkin, seeing how tall or how high or how low I want to put it. And then I'll mark that center line. So as you see, it's already, as you see here, it's already starting to crinkle. This pattern is going to do that. Well, all patterns are going to do that if they're, you're a 2D around a 3D shape. But when you do water on it, this little crinkle is very small. So, we can work around that. Just put a little crease there. At the top and the bottom, so let's go ahead and pull off the backing for this side and work down this side. I don't know if I can get a hold of it. So bend that back up. Pull the label backing off, then we'll go back to it. So I got these labels in the back come in strips, so you have to peel them off bit by bit. Sometimes that helps, sometimes that doesn't. Sometimes I just take them all off at once and then run with it. But okay, so we want this lighthouse here to be fairly straight, wrinkle free. We can put the wrinkles up in this top area. Because that's really clouds, it doesn't really matter in that area, right? But this is the main image that we want to try to keep fairly flat. And it's kind of hard for you guys to see on that way, so I'll try it this way. So, you know, we have main building structures here that I want to keep fairly flat. We got a road that comes down here, but we do have some white space around that. You know, so maybe that's where I put a wrinkle and then a wrinkle down here on the cliff face. That's kind of like a gate I'd like to keep, so maybe I'll try to pull this up and redo that gate area. So these are labels. You have to be very careful with these pumpkins, as I said. They do have a tendency to peel the paint on the outside. So I took that wrinkle from here, I peeled it up and then moved it up here, because this is, once again, is just bush area. Kind of got a little too wet there, but... And then I put another wrinkle here, and that way it conforms to the pumpkin. And I go through and press down on my edges, or not my edges, but my little valleys there. So we'll go ahead and do this side. Now, when you're doing, the issue with this pattern here, not only is it a 2D pattern, but it's a square pattern. So trying to fit a perfect rectangle on a round sphere instead of doing, something like that kind of has an oval shape to it that fits a little bit better on a pumpkin. This is pretty much a rectangular image. It has an odd area over here, but we have this straight line on this side. So that's going to cause problems later when we carve as well. So I'm going to go from the center, go from the middle out to the center here, and then pretty much what I'm going to do is just run my hand down it and create wrinkles throughout this area. Like I said, you're going to have to deal with wrinkles anyway. But so we have a little flap here that when I carve, I'm going to pull that flap up right here. Let's see if I can get tighter in there. So you see this little flap on the bottom side here. So what I'm going to do when I carve that, I'm going to put that flap straight up and then try to carve from this side to this side. And if they don't match, I'm going to modify that in the middle so they do kind of go together. Same thing with every other wrinkle in here. But that's really the way you have to carve these. So I got a little bit of the tree pattern there in the wrinkle. So I may compensate by carving that a little bit higher later. I took too much time and my pattern got dry, so I'm getting bigger wrinkles. But really, in the sky area here of this lighthouse pattern, it doesn't matter. Because whether this pattern changes from this to something else, it's just random sky, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now that I move the camera around a little bit, this is the pattern on the pumpkin, and what we're going to do is I loaded in the Dremel here just one of the smaller drill bits. And this is going to be used to cut through the pumpkin, cut all the way through the pumpkin. And you'll do that on all of these black areas. So everything that's black gets cut completely away. So at this point, I cut completely through the pumpkin, trying to keep the tool perpendicular to the pumpkin. So it should be coming straight out or going straight into the pumpkin on the drill bit here. That's kind of losing some light there with the shadows, but hopefully you guys will be able to watch me. So I'll turn it on, I'll go directly in, I'll work around the outside of the shape, and then sometimes I'll push the piece in, sometimes I'll pull the piece out. A lot of times it'll just come out by itself. But if the piece falls in the pumpkin, no worries, we'll get it out later through a hole in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and put my mask on. Got my mask here. Then start carving. I'm going to leave this run, and then we'll do a time lapse later so you can watch me carve pretty much everything on this pumpkin, and then we'll come back and do a little bit of discussion before we do shading. Okay, so I've done a small section of this. Let's see where we are. Pieces of the lighthouse, and then the fence going down. And I don't know if you can see this, but when you carve through, the paper kind of folds up and bunches up at the end. So what I do is I go through and go back through and then push that paper back down, because we're gonna have to go over this same area with the shading tool to get the fence lines here. Let me get that center. The fence lines here, the other parts of the lighthouse here. So we're going to have to go through this pattern, so we want to press this down and get it back as smooth as possible so we can see what we're doing for the shaded parts. Now, if your pattern comes off, it's good to have a second copy of your pattern just for reference, you know, so in case, you know, something like this this little piece in here, you know, your pattern comes off or doesn't stick, you can just reference your pattern and then kind of wing it later. So, you know, I'm just working down here. Most of the time I work with the smaller pieces and then move on to the larger ones. Sometimes I don't, but I always work in an area at a time. So, you know, here I'm doing lighthouse. I'll move on to the buildings this way. I'll probably come across this way, do the bottom piece, and then do the top of the lighthouse and the clouds. Probably last, because those are the largest sections. Now, you know, you're gonna need to kind of watch where you're carved. So, for instance, this piece here, you know, it's kind of general rule of thumb to work smallest to largest. So you don't want to cut out this largest piece, because when that's cut out, you have nothing bracing this end when you cut out this piece here. So I would cut out this piece and then the larger piece here. and then, you know, the larger pieces on the other side. So, you know, this end has something to brace against when I'm carving this black piece out. So we'll just continue carving through here and see how it goes. Now, most of the time when I'm carving through here, you might have saw earlier that I used one of these dental picks to go in and try to pull these pieces out. Now you got to go through, you got to make sure you're going all the way through, or you won't be able to pull your pieces out. If that happens, just go back around your drill hole, make sure everything's loose, and then pull your pieces. Back to carving. Okay, so at this point you can see all the rough places, you can see all the places where they're carved in. At this point it doesn't really look like a whole lot. But let me clean this off a little bit, and then we'll come back and put a light in it, and I'll show you. Now, what I use to light these pumpkins are just little clip lights, and if you'll see the clip on there, see if we can get that on the background. And it has a little toggle switch here. You can turn it on, turn it off. Pretty easy. These are sold in like Lowe's or hardware store, somewhere that sells lamp parts. So this is a part of a lamp that you can replace. Set that aside. So usually what I do is I kind of find the middle of the pattern and go to the back side. That's kind of middle right there. And then, I don't know, go up a couple inches from the bottom, 2 inches, 2.5, something like that. And then just drill a 1-inch hole. So this clip light is just going to go into the hole and then, you know, pinch the light together, and it kind of locks into place on these little ridges, and now you have a pumpkin light. So what we were seeing before, let's see, right there, so get that pointed towards you guys. So, you know, we did part of the lighthouse, part of the housing on this side, and then up in this place, and then down the fence line here. At this point you can turn it on. Hold on, let me turn off a light here. So, alright, at this point you can turn your light on and you can see the parts that you've cut through. Now remember, there still is paper and stuff in here, so you're not going to be able to completely see. But really, what you want to check is that your holes, the holes you cut out of your pumpkin are glowing. So let's say you went in at an angle instead of straight into the pumpkin this way. The light might not be able to come out the pieces that you carved. So that's pretty much the start of this. I'll go ahead and yank the lights and then go through the carving of the rest of this here in a minute. Okay, so there's the cutouts that are lit up. Got the light in there. Everything's looking good. Sorry, I accidentally unplugged the camera instead of unplugging the drill. So, at this point, we're pretty much done with the cutouts. While I was doing the last piece of this, I got to a point to where I really didn't care what it looked like as long as I got done. And that's the point where you drop it and step away and come back in a little bit. So I'm going to address a couple issues in this pumpkin, mostly with the angles of the cut to make sure they're all pointed into the pumpkin instead of up or down. And then we'll come back later and start with the shading. Okay, so after a quick break to give myself a rest, I'm going to start in on the shading. So what I'm going to use here, let's see if you can get a look at that. It is a diamond bit out of the set that I showed you. It's the pointed one. And I want to use the pointed one because there are some very fine lines in here. That's going to need to be carved. And then once I get to some of these other areas, I'll probably shift to a larger bit. And then I'll outline this piece here, this big area, and then switch to an even larger bit to just hog out a lot of this material. Now, the issue we have, right? So we have to, when we carve into here, when we're doing the shading, we want to go about halfway through. So I only want to put that much of the tip into the pumpkin. So you got to be very careful not to get too deep or too shallow because that affects the lighting. So I'm going to go in probably about that deep. As long as you don't go through the pumpkin, it's still going to turn out orange, but not far enough down will be a darker orange. The further down will be a lighter orange. So I'm just going to work around, just follow the patterns and just remove all of the gray areas in the pattern here. So the black areas we cut through, clean through so it'll shine the brightest. Now we're going to go back through and do the gray areas, and those are going to add the shadow. So when you light it up, those are going to be orange instead of more of a yellow, and it'll give you like a three-color look. Dark, light, and orange, or dark yellow and orange. So one thing we do have issues with that we have to be very careful. So some of these pieces over here, now that we cut them out, they're really not stuck down to anything. So what I do is I just kind of follow the patterns, and then if there's a piece that's coming up or has been lost, I'll check my reference photo that I showed earlier and then just kind of wing it. And on something like this, that's fine because, you know, really your main shapes here, and your lighthouse, your fence line, those are the main things that are recognizable and need to be fairly straightforward or need to follow the line, or they may not look correctly. Now, anything in this area here, this area up here, going outside of the line, doing something a little bit different than on the pattern, that's not a problem because it's not going to be an issue unless you are exactly matching what you carved to a copy of the pattern. And nobody's really going to do that. You just need to, you know, this is the pattern you're carving. This is what needs to this is what needs to look like, and this is a guide. But you know, if you end up not doing exactly what's here, really nobody's going to notice. You know, I would probably say, you know, Stony of Stonykins would look at your pumpkin and not notice, unless it's like a huge mistake. But you know, these are pretty intricate, so there's a lot of information or a lot of work that goes on into this pattern. And then, you know, just like cutting out the black, you just stay with inside the lines. You just do it for the gray, and you don't go all the way through the pumpkin. So we'll start from there and continue on. Now, Okay, so we're coming back at it. A lot of the shading done last time, so this time I'm gonna go ahead and go through here, clean up the rest of this shading on this side, work on this side, around the top. What I'm going to do with this large area is I'm going to outline it with the smaller tool, and then go back through with the larger tool and remove a lot of this bulk, and then at the end we'll smooth it out with probably a wire brush, because that worked really good last time. So we'll just continue. So since this was a square pumpkin, or a square pattern on a round pumpkin, when you look at this, you'll see the corner of this kind of goes off over this way, and I don't really want that. I didn't like the look of that last time I did it. So what I did was I redrew this line to be more perpendicular to this, or more in line, parallel in line with these pumpkin lines. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a little bit better than the shape of the pumpkin and this corner being way out here. And hopefully that gives it a little bit better look than what it was before. You know, I'm just using, right now, just using a folded piece of paper, and kind of freehand it, but it didn't turn out very good. So just chop up a folded piece of paper, draw my new line on there, and then that's going to be my edge of my pattern line. So everything else is going to come this way, and then when you look at it, it just kind of follows the line of that the pumpkin lines here, and I think it's going to make it look a little bit better than the last one I did. So I'm going to go with that, and then just continue carving. Okay, so now that I have the main carving done, this is kind of what it looks like. So see how the big open area here is just really rough because I was just trying to remove a lot of material. But what I want to do now is smooth that out. So smooth out a lot of the large areas. This down here I'm going to leave because it looks like waves, a little rough, a little rocky. So that should be able to stay fine. Same with these areas up here. You know, it's supposed to be a stone lighthouse, so that's all fine. But I want to smooth this out because this is supposed to be clouds. Now, there are several ways to doing that. You know, once again, you can use your large diamond bit here with the flat top and, you know, just meticulously go over it. Another way is to use like the grinding stones. Some of these are a little bit larger. I use those to flatten it out. But what I'm gonna, well, let me show you these. These are paint strippers, and for really large areas, you can use these. Now these are going to be really good as well. But what I decided to do is use a wire brush attachment here. So last time I used this, it kind of gave a wispy feel to the cloud, so that's what I'm going to use. And then I'm just going to go over this whole thing and just flatten it out, being really careful with areas that stick out here, that doesn't have a lot of support behind it, like these little pieces here. And then just try to even everything out to where it looks good. So you can look, let's see if you can see, like at an angle, you know, we really don't have a lot to work with thickness wise here in some of these areas. So I have to be very careful about what I do so I don't go all the way through the pumpkin. But like I said, I'm just going to be smoothing out those areas. Okay, I think I'm happy with this. So you notice like all of these are now fairly smooth. It's kind of rough a little bit, but you know, it's going to kind of look like rolling clouds. Let me plug it in here, and then we'll turn off the light and see how it looks. Now, I'm not going to take the pattern off. Usually I just peel the pattern off, but this particular pumpkin, the paint on the pumpkin did not hold. So wherever there's pieces here that are coming off that should be solid, but the paint peeled. And I have a feeling it's going to do this like all over the pumpkin if I try to take the pattern off. So I'm going to end up soaking this in water and seeing if I can pull that pattern off without removing any of the paint underneath. It might be a good idea, it might end up being a horrible idea. If all else fails, I'll go back through and paint over it, and then see if I can get it looking correctly. But let's go ahead and light this up and turn off a light, and we'll see how it looks. And there we go. So the shaded pieces glow orange. The cut through pieces are pretty bright. And after I clean this up, we'll come back and see if this paper comes off correctly. If not, I don't know. Like I said, I'll have to do some fixing, but for now, I'm fairly happy with it. If I can get that light bulb out of the way. There we go. So there is my lighthouse. Alrighty, so after some cleaning, I went ahead and when I was pulling the pattern off this, I saw a lot of paint chipping and peeling off. Now, I really should have taken the advice on the Stonykins website forum, and that was to cover this in a coat of urethane, matte urethane, that so the paint wouldn't peel off. However, the previous pumpkins I did, we didn't have a problem, so I ended up not doing that. That was, and I should have. Especially with this one, because this one peeled a lot. So what I ended up doing was throwing it in a tub of water, letting the paper soak away, scrubbing it with a soft brush, and then using something like Goo Gone or something like that to remove the sticky residue. Then I washed it again. Just more work than it needed to be. If I would have sprayed it with the matte urethane to begin with, I wouldn't have all these problems. I would have just been able to remove the sticker. That being said, it did turn out pretty good, so let me show you. Get it right about there. So this is the daytime version, and you know, you can see it's pretty clean. But the problem with the daytime version is you can't really see what's going on. You just know that down here there's a lot of holes in the pumpkins. Up here it's just a lot of blank space that's carved halfway through. You really can't see it in this instance. So let me light it up. We'll come back here in a minute. I'll get it all lit up and then we'll look at it from there. Okay, so here's the final product. So we have the lighthouse. Now, when you're in the middle of carving this stuff, you don't really understand what's going on a lot of times. You know, right about here, all you know, you need to carve the gray, but when you look at it lit, you can tell that's a house. You know, you can tell that there's a building over on this side. A lot of this over here. The cliffside here, the waves, the sky, you know, this all comes together when it's lit. So if you're carving and you're having issues with the big picture, just light it up and take a look at it. So we can come over here, move it this way a little bit. So we have the palm trees over on this side, the waves crashing against the shore here, and then the smoothed out top part kind of looks like waves in here. The clouds up top look really cool with that wire brush. I think it came out fantastic, but that's just me. So there you go. Once again, you can this pattern was downloaded off of Stonykins.com. He has a lot of great patterns there, and I don't know, maybe I'll film my next one. We'll see. Talk to you guys later. Bye.